go out and have broader community engagement, broader community meetings, which is how all of that feedback got to us. I know that there were 4 or 6 community engagement meetings that happened. Everyone was welcome to provide feedback. We encouraged that. I'm glad it happened. We got a lot of emails, and that helped form and shape the decisions that this board made. So I think a lot of the rumors that came out were out of the initial committee that was formed to process a lot of the data. But we went broader and asked for community feedback from the entire community. And I know that we all appreciated that, because there were things that the community was concerned about, and they stood up and said that they were concerned about it.
Kristen, I'm sorry. As it relates to the potential closure of schools and removal of programs, what data is used in that committee to even have it come up as a point of conversation?
Well, that committee was looking at capacity numbers, utilization numbers, demographic data, and also, and because we were looking at having to rezone some schools, and so the recommendations came back to consolidate some, to put all of our academy programs in one place instead of in 5 or 6 different locations around the school district. That's something that has actually been discussed by the board in the past.
And these recommendations came from staff or from?
The community committee.
The community committee.
The community committee put some of those recommendations out there.
And do we have a list? Can I find a list of who these people were that were part of that committee?
Sure.
I'd like to see that. Yes.
But I also wanted to ask Dr. Dupree to talk about our community engagement process at some point and our collaborative communities effort.
I wanted to give Mrs. Hellier a chance to make a comment. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I do recognize, thank you all for your comments. I also wanted to kind of just comment on some things you said. I recognize the fact, and I think we recognize the fact that we have opportunities, and I think the feedback that you all gave tonight, we've heard it, and so some of the things around the community, who represents the community. I know Dr. Dupree is working on having a consistent group of people that we can call on, and I think it would be remiss if we, based on some of the things that you stated, that we're not calling on you all as part of that committed team. I think that's where I see, we have an opportunity there, and that's what I'm hearing tonight. And Mr. Boney, when you stated around our facilities master planning committee, and there's a process, kind of what Kristen stated, but I do want you to know that we also, through this process, saw that we had some opportunities as well. And we'll be looking to it for the next time that we come to the community around these items, whether it be bond or whatnot. There was things that we had a plan after the feedback that we did receive from the community, people like yourself. We do realize that, maybe next time or there's some adjustments we need to make in order for us to, before we publicize certain information. So we recognize that as an organization, and we're taking that into consideration. So I really appreciate you all's comments, and it's not on deaf ears, and we understand that we've got some of those opportunities. And I appreciate you all giving it to us and continue to give it to us, and so that we can, like we said, be collaborative with the process. Because I understand perception, and like Ms. Tessin said, it is 99.9, whatever percentage she shared. I added another 0.05% to that when it comes to perception of our schools. It is important for us that the perception of all of our schools, all the work that we're doing, is perceived in a very positive manner. We want to be able to have all of our students, not just for us, the people who buy the homes, but for the students who go there as well. That's what's important. Well, we want to have a sense of pride in the schools that our students are going to, so that when they say that they're from X school or X school, they're not getting any judgment or any kind of ridicule about that school. It's a sense of pride for them as well. So I know that's what we're striving for as a district, and so this is a continuous process. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you, Mrs. Haliger. I think that we could continue this conversation for some time. We appreciate the comments, but for the sake of time and staying on subject here, we need to move on. Did you want to make a few comments, and then we
Well,
need?
I want to wrap up a couple of things on this, as I think it's important so I'm going to reinforce that how much I value the open conversation. I've talked to the board several times in the last few months about, I have learned more about community engagement during the last year than I have my entire career. And it started, as Ms. Tassan mentioned, back with the Willow Ridge Marshall consolidation. And we worked with a lot of people in their community. And then it continued, of course, right into Harvey. And so, I mean, we're all committed. And staff, of course, we have to execute on all this. And so the offering you've made to reach out to you is very helpful, because that is an avenue I had not considered, that we need to call you all to find out more information. And we'll definitely you can expect to hear from us on that. Because there's times we need to hear from new voices, not the same voices over and over and over again. And there's many loud voices who will be heard, whether it's on social media, whether it's at our public meetings. But if there's people who want to spend the time giving us feedback, we need to know who they are. And so that's some of the things we're doing right now. We're forming actually focus groups in the community right now, because everything you've talked about is where we are. We're trying to get to the heart of some of the community-based issues that could be affecting what's happening in our schools. Because we've talked about student behavior, we've talked about literacy. As students struggle, we can address a lot of issues in the schools. But there's some things it takes parents, it takes churches, it takes nonprofit organizations, it takes the city, it takes people beyond the school, because our teachers are not social workers, and they're not social servants. They're educators, and they have to manage student behavior, and they will teach students to read. But there reaches a point we need more people helping us, and so we want to get people to the table to help identify what they perceive to be the biggest areas of concern, and start to build those bridges. So I personally appreciate all the feedback and the comments, and you will definitely see us use that as we move forward. I do want to be mindful of time. There's a couple of things I wanted to talk about as well. In regard to community engagement, I've talked about we are shifting the way we do that. We're going to start doing an application-based process and direct contact-based process, not going to the same people over and over and over again. I want to make sure you're clear, so you can be looking for some of those changes. We've talked about the facilities master planning process that took place in the spring. That's another way I want you to see that we're making investments in Missouri City schools. The board passed action that has tasked the staff with moving forward with designing innovative programs and doing things to really renovate and rejuvenate the schools in Missouri City. Because we believe that most of them are underutilized right now. And and we're losing a number of kids to charter schools and private schools. So we want to be able to bring programs into these schools that are going to improve student performance, improve the climate, and like Ms. Helliger said, improve the esteem of the school, where students in the community can feel good and positive, where parents where that's the best option for parents, not a charter school, 10 or 15 miles away in Houston somewhere. We've got good schools and a good system, and we want to make every school a bright spot of the community. And to do that, we're not just going to sit in our office and dream up programs. We're going to have community-based committees work with us about how to design these programs, what the community wants, what the kids would benefit from the parent and community, including city council and business voices. So I think that will really help. Those kinds of activities will really help break down some of those perceptions. So with that in mind, we do have a bond program. So we have another agenda item, but I want to take a minute to talk just about the bond program, because you've asked, and just doing a little math in my head, all of these pieces of paper in front of you, we've given you one page for each school in Missouri city limits. So depending on what area you represent, you may care about some of these, you may not care about others, but I guess as city council members, you're going to care about all of them. The total investment in these few schools is over $75 million in the bond program. And the key aspect of the program overall, of the bond program, is safety and security, addressing enrollment growth. But I think the thing that's probably most significant to you is renovating our older schools to make sure they have all the modern technology and modern features that our new schools have. Because our students today learn differently than schools, than they did 10, 15, 20 years ago when some of these schools were built. Average age of our school is now 25 years. And Missouri City, of course, is not the fast-growing district as it once was. But we know we need to go in and renovate to do things to bring the schools up to modern standards. And so that's what the bulk of this money is for in the Missouri City schools. So we just want to know we're making a lot of energy investment in terms of teaching, the systems we're putting in place, leadership investment, but we're also have proposed significant financial investment for the bond program to make the schools attractive, modern places of learning as well. And of course, we'll be happy to address any questions you have. You can always reach out to us as we move through the bond communication cycle during the next few months. But I'd like to, at this point, I guess, turn it back over to the mayor and the board president to kind of navigate through the agenda.
Mayor, did you have anything on this agenda item?
I think the city manager did. You were talking about the MOU.
Yeah, one of the things our council has talked about is the importance of revisiting our memorandum of understanding. I know the superintendent and I have talked about looking at our use agreement because throughout the year there are a number of activities that involve both entities. So one of the things that we've talked about in the course of the next month is really sitting down, mapping out what those activities and events are, and really just trying to, instead of coming back every single time, having it mapped out in that use and memorandum of understanding, because sometimes there are challenges of really understanding what can be done, what can't be done, and we need to make sure that that's memorialized in some type of document where there's a clear understanding of those relationships.
And you might mention the one incident that you mentioned to me so that they're aware of it on the summer
Word.
program.
Can you get us some information on that? And we'll get it worked out. Thank you.
Just $30,000.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to next move on to the our next agenda item, which is discuss legislative priorities for the 86th legislative session. Dr. Dupree, you want to, or should we have a conversation? Or
I would suggest conversation.
yeah, we want to have some open conversation about this. Mr. Rice, you want to kick it off?
Yes, I do.
All about money.
I would like to start off by just talking briefly about school finance and how we get our funding. We get our funding from three primary sources. One is from the local property taxes that folks pay, and the second is from the state, and the third is from the federal government. The federal government has certain programs that are earmarked for those programs. It's non-discretionary, and so I'm just going to leave that off the table. But when I got on the school board in 2010, the split between local property taxes and state funding was 52% local and 48% state. And today, that is closer, Dr. Dupree, correct me if I'm wrong, please, we're about 60% local and 40% state. It has increased that much. So it concerns me as a member of the school board and as a private citizen when I hear members of the legislature, and like they did in the last legislative session, talk about putting a cap on property tax growth, the revenue derived from same. And you may recall that there was a proposition by Senator Betancourt in the last legislative session to cap property growth at 4%. Now, as each year, let me think the best way to explain this, as our property growth increases, the district realizes the benefit of that increase for 12 months. And 12 months later, when the state of Texas is getting ready to write us a check for their share, they say, wait a minute, how much was your property tax growth last year? 10%. Wow, that was a lot. What was the yield on that 10%? I'm just going to make up a number. Let's say it's $18 million. So what we're going to do is we're gonna write you this check based on the formulas that we have to follow. We're gonna subtract $18 million from it. And so when they do that, they put us into a place where we can never lower the tax rate. Unlike the city, unlike the county, from time to time, you will reach a point where the revenues coming in from property taxes and the number of residents you have will allow you to perhaps lower the tax rate 0.5 cent or 1 cent. Not forever, but you can give the taxpayers a break, and then, you know, it'll get out of equilibrium again. But that will never happen for the school district under the present school finance program. We had 3 years in a row of double-digit tax increases. 2015, 2016, 2017, 10%, 10%, and 11%. And each year, when our CFO prepares his budget, he goes to meet with Glenn Whitehead, the CAD Appraisal District. What do you think revenue's going to be? Because we're starting the budget process in January and February, because we've got to approve it in June. And he has to give a forecast, which apparently we'd have as much success if we killed a chicken and opened up its entrails and used that to define the future. Have just as much success. So we lost in 2018. Our property growth fell precipitously from 11% the previous year to 3.5%. We're all queued up to give the teachers a raise. We found a way to do that and lower taxes at the same time. That's another story. But the key takeaway is the state benefits as our property taxes increase, because they're sending less money to us. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. So when I hear some people say we want to put a 4% cap on it, property taxes are out of control. Our CFO has a slide, and now I've heard from the governor wants to limit it to 2.5%. Last time, the proposal excluded school districts. The governor's proposal includes school districts, and I would just like to ask him, how are you going to make up the difference? Because the state is benefiting from increased property taxes, and our property taxes, going back for the last 22 years in Fort Bend ISD, have fallen below 2.5% 2 times in 22 years. So I don't want to pay a lot of property taxes. I know nobody does, but to cast this as a crisis of out-of-control property taxes is really a false premise. And so that's the one thing that we have to worry about right now, and we, like you, must live within our budget. If we are facing cuts, we have to make cuts too. 2010, I told you earlier, we lost $28 million, and people came to me and said, well, can we have a bake sale? Can we have a car wash? And I said, well, yes, we can, but let's put this in perspective. Back then, our annual electric bill for the whole district was $15 million a year. So I said, if we turned off the lights and AC in every building we own for 12 months, we'd still be $13 million short. This is catastrophic. It can't be solved with a bake sale or a car wash or even turning off the electricity. So I just would like, one of our big deals is to work with the legislature to come up with a funding source that is less erratic than the one that we have now, that will allow us to continue to put the best teachers in the classroom. Now, over the years, we've made cuts. We had a reading recovery program that was very effective, but we did away with it. Why'd we do that? The cost per pupil was excessive. And then we had to get another reading program where we're attempting to leverage that. And is it successful? Well, I don't know. Anytime you institute a new program, it's going to take you several years to find out if it's working or not. But school finance is one issue that I'm very, very concerned about. Now, the Texas legislature will tell you, well, hey, Jim, if you need more money, we'll let you raise your tax rate all the way up to $1.17. Stop crybabying about it. Well, that's with a TRE, okay? We've got to have a tax ratification election, and it's in 3 tiers. Tier 1 is $1. So when you take the total appraised value within Fort Bend ISD is roughly, once it's been adjusted, it's roughly $36 billion. And divide that by 100 and multiply that times $1 per 100. And then that yield you divide by the weighted average daily attendance. So of our schools. It's a little complicated, but we got roughly 85,000 weighted average daily attendance WADA, and that amount for us is roughly $409,000 per student. If that level crosses the threshold of $514,000, that difference has to be sent back to the state. We got to write them a check. That's what's happened to the Houston Independent School District. That's what's happened to the Dallas Independent School District. That's what's happened to the Austin Independent School District. So here's a fun fact. How much is the city of Austin ISD, rather, how much are they going to send to the state this year? $650 million. That's a lot of money. That's more than the county and the city of Sugar Land. That's almost equal to our annual budget. So that happens when the appraised value continues to increase and the number of students decreases. And the state is supposed to take that surplus and redistribute it amongst the school districts that don't have a good tax base. I don't know if all the money's getting redistributed or not. So the next tier is 6 cents. They call the 6 golden pennies because it's not subject to recapture. We're there now. And the third tier is 11 cents. Those are called the copper pennies because they're subject to recapture. It's the same formula that I told you before, except the threshold is $319,000. And we've already been talking about going to the copper pennies. We have been talking about raising taxes because the net effect of the current school finance program has pushed us back and pushed us back and pushed us back, every school district in the state, to where our back is against the wall. So does an elected official like to talk about raising taxes just for fun? No. But we're close. We're close to doing that. And so what I would like, hopefully, to come out of it is to find some relief from the legislature. And what I've told them before is that, okay, if there's no more money, then don't give us any more unfunded mandates. So I'll stop there on that one topic.
Yeah, we've tried that every year.
Well, one thing I think, and from a council standpoint, we need to be there hand in hand with you. That's where we can help you. I mean, well, as you know, we're going through the same thing. We got a whole bunch of people up there in Austin who are looking out for themselves, their position, and that's what this is all about. You know, people don't want to talk about it, but that's what they're doing, and they just tell people stuff in order that they can get reelected, and we get stuck with the council. So, you know, I definitely share in what you go through because you the same people who live in Missouri City. Many of you, we all go through the same thing, but that's where we need to be there holding hands, okay? And we need to make sure that we need to get the school district out of anything we can get the school district out of, you know. And I guess it just we teach people to be prosperous, you know. And the mayor asked the question last night about utility district, and somebody said they only paid 47 cents. Well, I've chaired the budget committee for years, and that's 47 cents could take care of that debt if every house is over $750,000, but it's gonna be higher if the house is not. And so there's no parity in this situation. It's what it is. And that's why we need to be holding hands and helping each other on both sides, because we're the same people. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
The current, I'm sorry, just one follow-up to Mr. Wyatt's comment. The current school finance system penalizes large urban districts who have the most children at risk, and it should not be doing that. And now Fort Bend ISD is a large urban district.
Penalize you for being prosperous.
Well, there's no doubt that, obviously, we spent a lot of time last year that nobody listened to. Went to testify in Austin, and they didn't listen. Well, I say that. The D's did, the R's didn't, unfortunately. And one R on that committee did, because he was a mayor, and he understood what a 4% revenue cap would do to a city. As a matter of fact, he used used me as an example. You know, the city, Missouri City, 50% of its budget goes to public safety. Another 15% goes to the rest of the employees in the city. Well, that doesn't leave a lot for anything else, like streets and sidewalks and all that other kind of good stuff that we're going through. But I will tell you that had we seen a 4% revenue cap this year, we'd have lost $2.9 million. Where do I cut? I can't and won't lay off police officers. I can't quit fixing streets, and they don't understand that, or at least, and Krista knows it. At least the Senate side doesn't, because they and I've said this openly there, and it's like we said, they're only interested in one thing: the lieutenant governor's appointments as chairman of committees.
Getting reelected.
They're not interested in what the citizens are going through, and they don't listen. I will say this, that we have one state representative who, by the way, is the only accountant in the legislature, Bill Stevenson. He understands school finance. He understands finance, period. The others are doctors, lawyers, insurance salesmen, and none of them are bankers like me, and none of them have really served in an elected capacity in a city other than the people like Kel Seliger, who is that R, who voted against it. And unfortunately, they think that what they're doing is what the citizens want them to do. And they keep talking about, they quit calling it tax reform. They knew that wasn't going anyplace. And we're going to lower your taxes. No, what it's done, it takes the monkey off of their back and puts it squarely on our back, and that's what's happening to us this year. That's why we're going to have to raise taxes 3 cents, because they don't have the guts to do it, and they don't have the guts to take the responsibility for school finance. And until they do, and until people continue to send them to Austin, it ain't going to change, because they're not listening to us. They don't listen to the school district. I will tell you, in those hearings, there were matter of fact, there were 3 rooms, over 500 fire chief, police chief, elected officials there, and they spent all but 30 minutes of that hearing talking out of one side of their mouth so that they could get to talk to about the bathroom bill, which was more important to them than anything up there. And then they spent the rest of the session discussing the bathroom bill, So they forgot about everything else. And I don't know. We've got, it's like Jerry said, somehow we've got to band together, and we've got to make a difference, or it's going to continue to just get worse. And if it gets to be 2.5, which I don't think it will, I don't think they have the votes in the House, quite frankly. Thank goodness they don't. The Senate will vote in favor of it, and the House will vote it down again. But they have no earthly idea. Betancourt, guess what he does for a living, people? He's a tax collector. And his business represents people who think they pay too much in taxes. Now, if that's not self-serving, I don't know what is. To me, that's a conflict of interest.
Oh, you shouldn't have told on him.
I know I shouldn't tell him, that's the truth. Little troll, that's what I call him. But anyway,
For the
that's
record,
another- for the record, he's a troll. A little troll.
At that point, why don't you share what our legislative?
Sure. One of the things that we've been doing is we've been monitoring proposed legislation over the course of the interim. We had the deputy director for TML to come in and have some dialogue and discussion with us about what we can anticipate in the upcoming session. The most significant issues, as articulated by Mr. Rice, is really relate to limiting the city's ability to raise revenues for city services. You know, there's been an attack on local control, and our council has been very clear that any assault on that local control, that we needed to make sure that our lobbyists fight it wholeheartedly. And I think that's commonality between the city and the ISD as we go forth in this upcoming legislative session. We identified several issues. One of the main things is anything that preempts local authority on issues related to land use planning or lobbying or in general are things that the council has said that they wanted us to go against. But number one on our list is property tax reform. Legislation that reduces the rollback rate from 8% to any lower rate would be an issue that our lobbyists would oppose. Public safety. The Missouri City supports legislation that would repeal 1702-134 of the Texas Occupation Codes, which allows a license holder or an employee of a license holder for alarm systems to sell or solicit in cities without obtaining a permit or license from such cities.
And let me stop you right there.
Yeah.
That's a bill that many of you probably are not familiar with. But if you've had an alarm salesman ring your doorbell at 10:30 at night and think that we can stop them, we can't. They're unregulated. They can go door to door in your subdivision, knock on your door at any time of the day or night selling an alarm system. So tell me what legislator was in the alarm system when that damn bill got passed. Because we're trying to do some things with solicitations that bug people on Sunday morning when they're getting ready for church and you got somebody knocking on your door, other than schools, religion, those kinds of things. But an alarm salesman knocking on your door right before you're ready to go to church and you can't do anything about it, that has to change.
Well, I can do something about it.
Yeah, I can too. You have to post a no trespassing sign on your door. Then they're in violation. Then you can call the police for violating trespass. That's what this bill's about. It's not as simple as he read it. It is a serious thing. I get more complaints from people that go, why can't you do something about those alarm salesmen that are knocking on my door at 10 o'clock at night? Especially elderly people who are scared to death to go to the door to begin with. And you got some idiot standing there that does not licensed, didn't even have to register with the city. You all don't have to deal with that. We do. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, there have been a number of cities throughout the state have crime districts. We want to make sure that there is no effort to diminish that ability for cities to utilize or to be able to establish crime districts in their specific city. Sales tax elections for economic development. One of the things we recently, the council endorsed was an economic development plan and redevelopment plan. And as we look for tools in the toolbox, one of the things that we've talked about is allowing municipalities to hold elections to increase sales tax above the current limit for the purpose of economic development and redevelopment initiatives. We've talked about abatement of weeds. Missouri City has always been very proactive in abating weeds, and particularly through our code enforcement. So the city supports any legislation that would amend the Texas Health and Safety Code to allow the city to abate weeds that are either 48 inches or higher. And as you drive around, there are a number of lots that we see are that level, and we want to be able to abate them accordingly, particularly as it relates to any danger to health, safety of individuals. Number 7 on our list was vesting of certain permits. We support legislation that would clarify that Chapter 245 of the local code does not apply to a permit issued for the construction of a structure intended for human habitation that is issued under regulations adopting uniform building, fire, electrical, plumbing, and mechanical codes adopted by the National Code of Organizations. And then lastly, redevelopment incentive programs. One of the things that we've tried as we try to revitalize some of the aging areas in our community is to look at ways in which we can have or provide incentive programs for companies to be able to come in. So any efforts or legislation that will provide an incentive for investing companies, individuals investing in redevelopment projects would be welcomed. And a number of those programs have been very successful in other states, and we're looking at how we can make that a possibility in the state of Texas.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Tossan, do you have a comment?
Yeah, so as the legislative liaison this year, I thought I would talk about some of the things we're looking at in FBISD, and these have not been presented to the entire board, but these are some things that we're considering for the upcoming session. And as Mr. Rice said, school finance is always at the top of our list because it's always one of those struggles that we have. I wanted to read for you guys. I looked up a letter that TEA wrote recently, and a couple of the sentences in it are, this letter serves to inform school districts that beginning with the 2018-19 school year, the Texas Education Agency will ensure that all school districts are raising their required local share of the Foundation School Program before flowing Foundation School Fund payments, which means state payments, into the local school district. The TEA will not flow Foundation School Fund payments to the school districts whose adopted M&O tax rates are below the required level. What's important about that is that a state levied property tax is unconstitutional. And that letter right there states that the state requires the local school districts to have a certain level tax rate in order to raise a certain level of funds before they will even give us foundation school funds. So most people do not know that. Most people don't know what Mr. Rice was describing either, that when property values go up, that money goes back to the state, and that's not recapture funds. That's in addition to recapture funds, and those funds go in the general fund and are not redistributed. So those are a couple of things that we've been fighting for a few sessions. We will continue to be as loud a voice as we possibly can on those issues. And like Mr. Rice said, if the legislature just didn't pass another unfunded mandate, it would actually save us money. So we've done those calculations, but we have provided the last 2 sessions a list of unfunded mandates that cost us in excess of about $65 million, and that's just a rough calculation. That doesn't count the fact that special education is not fully funded and bilingual is not fully funded and those types of things. So we will continue to work on that front. The tax cap is another thing, as Mr. Rice talked about. There's some bond legislation floating around out there. You guys, I'm sure, are aware of, where the governor has talked about having a certain threshold of voters to be able to pass a bond. Of course, that would cripple us and our ability to keep up with the growth that we talked about earlier in our meeting. And I don't know how much support there is for that at this time, but it's certainly something that we're keeping an eye on and will not be in favor of, because we might never pass another bond again. Certainly not if there wasn't a presidential election. We couldn't even get the voter turnout that they're talking about requiring. And also, I heard Anthony talk about your lobbyists fighting for these things or lobbying for these things for you guys. We are our lobbyists. So your offer, Jerry, earlier of standing hand in hand, I think that's going to be critically important. Of course, I know we're more than willing to do it with you guys as well, but it'll be critically important for us because we don't pay lobbyists. We are the ones who go and who lobby on behalf of the school district. Another thing that I'm considering presenting to the board is a community education effort. I did this somewhat last legislative session, but I think we need an even bigger push to educate community members so that community members can be empowered to speak out, and just helping them understand even a little bit of what's going on and giving them one or two things to just call about, write about, be vocal about, I think will help our efforts. I know, like Alan, I spent a lot of time in Austin, and a lot of what I lobbied for fell on deaf ears. So we've got to get more people involved, and more voices involved. And finally, as you guys are aware, school safety is a big issue that we're dealing with. And you talked about Jerry going into some of our schools, and now I think all but one of our schools has a safety vestibule. We do a lot of security. A lot of our exterior doors are now locked. And it's changed the way school is. It absolutely has changed it. And we did have a safety and security committee, and last month last few weeks, we've talked quite a bit about that as a board. But mental health and wellness is going to be one of the things I think that we look at as a school district this year, because they're talking about a lot of funding for things like metal detectors and school marshal programs and things like that. But we also want the state to kick in money for programs that support our kids. And mental health and wellness is one of those. And I had the benefit of going with some staff members from FBISD to a meeting on trauma-informed care. And it's along the lines with our restorative discipline, and it just goes a step further by having someone on our campuses who can be an immediate intervention type person for someone that has been identified as needing help. And those, people are expensive. And if the state's going to kick in money to help in the school safety arena, we believe that these types of things should also qualify, because the first line of defense is if we have a child who's troubled, is really addressing that, and it extends and reaches out to the family as well. So it's a pretty holistic approach. So that's something that we'll be looking at as well. Did anyone want to add anything about legislative?
I was going to suggest I can sometimes have a creative mind, but or no mind at all. But no, I'm just joking. But maybe we ought to get together in all the cities before you go to the legislature, and maybe we ought to sign something that Dr. Dupree can put together that we say it's the same taxpayers. I mean, your taxpayers are our taxpayers. And maybe we need to come out forcefully where you got something in your hand saying, this is support of our taxpayers. Because we're the same. I have to tell it to the county when they think they're giving us money, too. We're the same taxpayers. But I think that would be a good start,
We had something like that last legislative session, and we're definitely looking at doing that again this session. In addition to maybe having a forum, if the city's willing, we're talking about getting the cities to partner with us, and maybe even the county, just an education-focused forum where we talk about some of these issues and try to educate our communities collectively. So we'll be reaching out to you guys about that.
Thank you. I think we'd love to do that, and we can get something together. Mr. Rice, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Burdine. I was just going to mention one other thing, some comments that Mr. Snipes made about local control. And I was in a meeting, I'm not going to say with who, but somebody from the state government who commented that the state has created the political subdivisions within the state, and thus they are responsible. And that's really moving backwards, I think, from a conservative position that local decisions are best made locally. And that's one thing that we're up against. The second thing is vehemently opposed to vouchers. And all of the self-styled true conservatives in the state who want to give public tax money to private schools or vouchers seem to have forgotten a basic American history lesson that we fought a war with Great Britain over taxation without representation. So the constituents of Fort Bend ISD are unhappy with me. They can vote me out of office. They don't have that same recourse when you don't have publicly elected city council members or school board trustees who are charged with the responsibility of being a guardian of the public trust. And the public knows if you're doing your job or not. And that is something that we've got to meet head on as well, because those tax dollars, which are purportedly being done to help children get out of struggling schools, will not help them unless their parents can make up the difference between a private school and what we can educate children for. And so our children are going to be left the district will be left with less funding to meet the needs of those children. And it's just unconscionable as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. I'm going to wrap this up and then we can adjourn here. But Mrs. Taussant had mentioned something that we are our own lobbyists. We are our own advocates, and something that the community doesn't see is every single one of us here at this table are public education advocates. And anytime we're in session in Austin, we show up. Some of us show up several times. We make a trip, several of us make a trip to Washington, D.C. every year. And as the 8th largest district in Texas, I think that we all feel a responsibility to educate for public education, advocate for public education. And when we make these trips, we just don't show up, but we have respectful, meaningful conversation with our legislators and our leaders, and I'm extremely proud of that. And I also wanted to mention that Mr. Rice is the chair of the Education Committee in the Fort Bend Chamber of Commerce, and as a matter of fact, we had a meeting last night with Senator Louis Kolkhorst, Rep. John Zerwas, TSTC was there, U of H, Wharton County Junior College, Lamar's Dr. Randall, and his board president, Charles Dupree, myself, Jeff Wiley. My point being is we all sat down and had dinner and had some open and honest conversation. Whether it fell on deaf ears or not is one thing, but we had an open and honest conversation about our struggles as in public education. So I just wanted to brag on us about that. And before we wrap up here, I wanted to give Mrs. Addie Helliger a second. She has a birthday wish. This is an announcement.
No, not yet. Oh, this is a surprise. So thank you. So to promote literacy on October 8th for my birthday, we will be having a readathon at Blue Ridge Elementary School, and it will start at 9 o'clock in the morning. And we're asking that as many of our council members and elected officials and community leaders come out and support that event. We want to fill that school up with people in leadership, just like us in the room, so that that school, that parents and the community know that we're there to support them. So hopefully I can get as many of you all to participate in that event. We have that information available. If not tonight, we'll send it out to you guys. But I would appreciate you all support. So thank you so much. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Mrs. Helliger. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Actually, first, before I say that, once again, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council members. We appreciate you once again. We'll continue to do this, and we'll continue to open that dialogue, and we appreciate your efforts in the future and building that partnership. It means a lot. We know that's our success depends on that. So,
thank you all, too.
May I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Meeting adjourned.
I don't have to have a motion.
We just leave. We don't have to do that.
It's over, it's over.